Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, the climate guy setting the record straight about climate. This video is titled Arctic Fraudsters Facing the Imminent Meltdown. The news this week is full of pictures of polar bear starvings, the fastest decline in Arctic sea ice in at least 1,500 years, Arctic permafrost thawing faster than ever, record ice loss, highest melt rate in 1,500 years. Arctic warming and ice melt are unprecedented. Warmer Arctic temperatures are the new normal. This sounds like an apocalypse. I flew over the Arctic last weekend and it appeared very cold and looked like there was lots of ice. But let's look at the data. This blue line shows Arctic sea ice extent from the National Snow and Ice Data Center in Boulder, Colorado. The dark gray line is the 1981 to 2010 average, and the gray area is the 2 standard deviation normal range. What we can see is that Arctic sea ice is not melting, it's actually growing very fast. It's in the 2 standard deviation normal band, and it's just below the 1981 to 2010 mean. That's not really a meltdown. I created this next map using 2 maps from the National Snow and Ice Data Center, and it shows ice growth since December 1st. The yellow area shows where ice was on December 1st, and the green area shows new growth in the Arctic since December 1st. You can see that there's been a lot of ice growth this month near Alaska, Russia, Canada, and Greenland. Now let's look at longer-term ice growth going back 10 years. This map is from the Danish Meteorological Institute, and it shows us the estimated ice thickness around the Arctic. All of these blue, green, yellow, and red areas are more than 5 feet thick, and the purple areas are thinner first-year ice, which is just forming now. You can see that most of the Arctic basin is covered with thick, multi-year ice that survived last summer and is getting thicker again this winter. Now let's compare the Arctic ice thickness to the same date 10 years ago. This map is from December 11th, 2007. You can see that there was a lot less thick ice back then and a lot more of the thin first-year purple ice. I'm going to switch back and forth now between the 2 maps just to make sure this is clear. 10 years ago, there was very little thick ice and lots of thin purple first-year ice. But now the thick ice has expanded tremendously and there's much less thin ice. 10 years ago, not much thick ice. Now, lots of thick ice. 10 years ago, not much. Now, lots of thick ice. The ice isn't disappearing, it's growing. So we've seen that there's lots more thick ice now during the winter than there was 10 years ago. What about at the summer minimum? This graph uses data from the National Snow and Ice Data Center in Boulder, Colorado, and it shows us the summer minimum extent in square kilometers for the last 10 years. What we can see is that the summer minimum sea ice extent has been growing over the past decade. The ice isn't shrinking and melting, it's expanding and growing. Let's go back and look at the headlines again. They say, we're witnessing the fastest decline in Arctic sea ice in at least 1,500 years. Well, the ice isn't declining, it's been growing for a decade. As is almost always the case with climate, the headlines are the exact opposite of what the data shows. There's another type of ice in the Arctic besides sea ice, and that's glacial ice, most of which is located in Greenland. This graph is from the Danish Meteorological Institute, and it shows us the current surface mass budget of the Greenland ice sheet. It shows us how much ice is forming or melting on the surface of the ice sheet. The dark gray band is the 1981 to 2010 mean, and the gray shows the range which has been experienced in past years. This line shows us the ice gain from September 1st, 2016 until the end of August 2017. As you can see, they had record ice growth on the surface of Greenland last winter by quite a wide margin. And the blue line shows ice growth this winter, which is once again well above average. Greenland has been gaining a lot of ice the last few winters. I'm going to talk about that again in a minute, but for now let's look at predictions made about the Arctic by climate scientists 10 years ago. If we go back to this week in December 10 years ago, our top government experts were predicting that the Arctic would be ice-free by 2012 or 2013. Could all Arctic ice be gone by 2012? Seth Borenstein, Associated Press. This week, after reviewing his own new data, NASA climate scientist Jay Zwally said, at this rate, the Arctic Ocean could be nearly ice-free at the end of summer by 2012, much faster than previous predictions. The Arctic is screaming, said Mark Cerise, senior scientist at the government's Snow and Ice Data Center in Boulder, Colorado. And here's a BBC article from December 12, 2007, 10 years ago this week. Arctic summers ice-free by 2013. Scientists in the U.S. have presented one of the most dramatic forecasts yet for the disappearance of Arctic sea ice. Their latest modeling studies indicate northern polar waters could be ice-free in summers within just 5 to 6 years. Professor Maslowski told an American Geophysical Union meeting that previous projections had underestimated the processes now driving ice loss. In the end, it will just melt away quite suddenly, said Professor Peter Wadhams of Cambridge University. So given the fact, you can argue that maybe our projection of 2013 is already too conservative. Our top government experts were predicting that the Arctic sea ice minimum would reach zero several years ago, but instead it's expanded. They had it exactly backwards. And Nobel laureate Al Gore, who has polluted the mind of every public school child on the planet with his climate propaganda, predicted that the Arctic would be ice-free by 2014. So now let's look past all the propaganda at what's actually going on in the Arctic. This graph is from the Danish Meteorological Institute and it shows us temperatures north of the 80th parallel. The red line is this year and the green line is the 1958 to 2002 average. The blue line is the freezing point, which is 273 degrees Kelvin or 0 degrees Celsius. What we can see is that winter temperatures have been running well above the 1958 to 2002 mean. They've been well below freezing, but above the long-term average. This is minus 20 degrees centigrade, which is below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. It's extremely cold. Ice doesn't melt at those temperatures, it forms at those temperatures. Now let's look at a different part of the graph, the summer. There's only a few weeks a year when the Arctic can actually melt. And what this graph shows us is that during the melt season, temperatures were actually below normal every single day. So there's only about 80 to 90 days per year when the North Pole can melt, and temperatures there have been running well below normal in recent years. So during the melt season, the Arctic has been colder than normal, and during the winters, it's been warmer than normal. What sort of effect does that have? Well, for one thing, warmer winters means more snow in Greenland. That's why we've been seeing record ice growth on Greenland's surface in recent years. It's exactly because of the winter warming. Let's go back and look at their headline again. Recent Arctic warming and ice melt are unprecedented. This is absolutely false. Summers when the ice can actually melt have been cooler than normal. And during the winter it's been warmer than normal, but that's meant an increase in glacial ice on Greenland. So let's look now at what's been causing these relatively warm winters near the North Pole. In recent winters, we've been getting big swings in the jet stream. This brings very cold Arctic air south. It snowed in Florida this week. But in order to bring very cold Arctic air down to Florida, it has to be displaced with warmer air from the south. So these big swings in the jet stream bring warm air up north and they bring cold air south. This makes Florida cold and it makes the North Pole warmer than normal. And we can see this in the autumn and winter snow extent data from Rutgers University. Autumn snow extent has been increasing rapidly in recent years to record levels. And winter snow extent has also been increasing to near record levels. This is because we're getting a lot of cold Arctic air moving further south than it used to. But the laws of conservation of mass and energy tell us that if cold Arctic air is moving south, it has to be replaced by warmer air from the mid-latitudes. This causes Arctic winters to warm up. It's not because of carbon dioxide, it's not climate change, it just has to do with the behavior of the jet stream. So let's summarize now. Arctic sea ice thickness and volume has increased over the last decade. The Arctic summer minimum has also increased over the last decade. Greenland's surface has been gaining record or near record amounts of ice in recent winters. Autumn and winter snow extent has been increasing to record or near record levels. And the experts and politicians have been dead wrong with their forecasts. And now, after all of their past failures, climate scientists have become very desperate and are simply lying about what's going on in the Arctic. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science for a long time.